when she stepped into his room at midnight and slowly unbuttoned her coat. She wasn't revealing what he expected. She was showing him a truth that would change both their lives forever. The clock on the wall showed 11:15 p.m. when the soft knocking started. At first he thought he was imagining it. After all, who would visit this late on a Tuesday night? He had been sitting at his desk for the past 6 hours, surrounded by research papers that seemed to multiply every time he looked away. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he kept sipping it anyway. The knock came again, more persistent this time. He pushed back from his desk, rubbing his tired eyes. His small apartment near the university was usually quiet at this hour. Most of his neighbors were graduate students like him, buried in their own academic struggles, or working professionals who went to bed early. When he opened the door, he was surprised to see the woman from apartment 4B standing in the hallway. She lived just down the hall, and they had shared polite smiles and brief hellos in the past few months. She was always well-dressed, always seemed to have everything together. Tonight was different. Her usually perfect hair looked slightly messy, as if she had been running her hands through it. Her eyes were red-rimmed, not from crying exactly, but from something deeper. She wore a long coat that seemed too heavy for the mild evening weather. "I'm sorry to bother you so late," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I need to tell you something. Something important." Before he could respond, she stepped into his apartment, not in a pushy way, but with the quiet desperation of someone who had been building up courage for hours, maybe days. His apartment was a mess. Books everywhere, papers scattered across every surface, dirty dishes in the sink. He felt embarrassed, but she didn't seem to notice. She was looking at him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "I know we don't really know each other," she continued, closing the door behind her, "but I've been watching you." The words hung in the air between them. Not in a creepy way, she quickly added, seeing the confusion on his face. "From my window, your light is always on. You're always working. Always pushing forward no matter what." She moved to the center of his small living room, her hands moving to the top button of her coat. Her fingers trembled slightly, and he noticed how thin her hands looked. Had she always been this thin? "I need to show you something," she said, her eyes never leaving his face. "Something I've been hiding from everyone in this building. From everyone in my life, really." He wanted to ask questions, but something in her manner told him to wait. This was clearly difficult for her. Whatever she needed to say, she had been building up to this moment for a long time. The first button came undone. Then the second. He felt awkward, not sure where to look or what to say. This wasn't what he had expected when he opened his door tonight. He had been hoping for maybe a neighbor asking to borrow sugar, or someone complaining about his music being too loud. "You probably think I'm crazy," she said with a weak smile, "coming here this late talking like this. But I realized something tonight. I realized I've been living like a ghost." The coat slipped from her shoulders and fell to the floor. Underneath, she wore a simple sweater. But what caught his attention wasn't the clothing. It was how frail she looked. How different she appeared from the confident woman he had seen in the hallways. But there was something else. Something that made his breath catch in his throat. Visible through the thin fabric of her sweater were the unmistakable signs of medical equipment. Small bumps and lines that spoke of procedures, of treatments, of a battle being fought in private. "I have cancer," she said simply, as if she was commenting on the weather. "Stage 3. I've been fighting it for 8 months now." The words hit him like a physical blow. He had been expecting many things, but not this. Not this raw honesty from someone who was practically a stranger. "I've been going to treatments 3 times a week," she continued, sitting down heavily on his couch. "Surgery, chemotherapy, radiation. The works. And through it all, I've been watching you from my window." She gestured toward the window that faced the courtyard between their buildings. He realized that from her apartment, she could see directly into his living room where he spent most of his time working. "Every night, your light is on. Every night you're there at your desk working on something. I started to wonder what could be so important that someone would work that hard, that consistently." He finally found his voice. "I'm working on my doctoral research. It's about cellular regeneration therapy. Medical applications." Her laugh was soft but bitter. "Of course it is. Of course the universe would put someone researching the very thing that might save people like me right across the courtyard." She leaned forward, her elbows on her knees, her hands clasped tightly together. "I've been watching you fight for your research the way I should have been fighting for my life. Instead, I've been hiding, going to treatments alone, telling everyone I was fine, pretending nothing was wrong. The room fell silent except for the hum of his refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. He didn't know what to say. What do you say to someone who has just revealed something so personal, so devastating? Why are you telling me this? He asked gently. Because tomorrow I go in for test results that will tell me if the treatment is working. And I realize that if the news is bad, I don't want to face it alone anymore. I don't want to keep pretending. She looked around his messy apartment at the stacks of research papers, at the evidence of his dedication to his work. I've spent the last 8 months being afraid to live because I might die, but you've shown me something different. You've shown me what it looks like to never give up, even when things seem impossible. Her eyes met his again, and this time there was something different in them, not just sadness or fear, but determination. A spark of the person she had been before the illness, or maybe the person she was becoming because of it. I want to ask you for something, she said. Something that might sound strange coming from someone you barely know. He waited, sensing that whatever she was about to ask would change both their lives in ways neither of them could predict. I want to help you with your research. I want to spend whatever time I have left doing something that matters. Something that might help other people facing what I'm facing. The request hung in the air between them. Outside, a car drove by, its headlights briefly illuminating the room. In that moment, he realized that his quiet, predictable life as a graduate student was about to become something entirely different. Something that would challenge everything he thought he knew about courage, about purpose, and about the unexpected ways people can change each other's lives. The silence stretched between them for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. He looked at her sitting on his couch, this woman who had just turned his entire evening upside down with her honesty. Her request to help with his research seemed both generous and heartbreaking at the same time. You don't even know what my research involves, he said finally, settling into the chair across from her. It's complicated medical stuff. Lots of technical terms and boring lab work. She smiled for the first time since entering his apartment. It was a real smile, not the polite ones they had exchanged in the hallway. Try me. I've spent the last 8 months learning medical terms I never wanted to know. I probably understand more about how the human body works now than I did before all this started. He gestured toward the papers scattered across his desk. I'm studying how cells repair themselves. Specifically, how we might be able to help damaged cells regenerate faster and more effectively. The goal is to develop treatments that could help people recover from injuries, diseases, even aging. Her eyes lit up with genuine interest. So you're basically trying to figure out how to help the body heal itself better? Exactly. But it's frustrating work. I've been at this for 3 years, and sometimes it feels like I'm not making any real progress. The lab work is slow, the testing takes forever, and half the time my experiments don't work the way they're supposed to. She was quiet for a moment, processing what he had said. Then she did something unexpected. She laughed. Not a bitter laugh like before, but a genuine sound of amusement. You know what's funny, she said. Here I am, literally living through what your research is trying to solve, and I never thought about it from the scientist's perspective. I've just been focused on getting through each day, each treatment, each doctor's appointment. She shifted on the couch, getting more comfortable. Can I tell you what it's really like? From the patient side? He nodded, realizing that in all his years of research, he had never actually talked to someone going through the kind of medical challenges his work was meant to address. The hardest part isn't the physical pain, she began. I mean, that's awful, don't get me wrong. The treatments make you feel like your body is betraying you. You're tired all the time, nothing tastes right, and you look in the mirror and don't recognize yourself. She paused, running her hand through her hair self-consciously. But the worst part is feeling like you're disappearing. Like the person you used to be is just fading away, and you don't know if you'll ever get her back. Her words hit him harder than any research paper he had ever read. All those technical terms and clinical trials suddenly had a human face, a real story behind them. The doctors are great, she continued. They explain everything in medical terms, show me charts and graphs, tell me about success rates and treatment protocols. But none of them can tell me what it feels like to be afraid to make plans for next month because you don't know if you'll be here. She looked out his window toward her own apartment. That's when I started watching you. Not in a creepy way, she added quickly. But your window faces mine and your light was always on. Even when I was having my worst nights, when I couldn't sleep because of the pain or the worry, I could look over and see you working. I had no idea, he said softly. You became like a lighthouse for me. Proof that somewhere, someone was fighting just as hard as I was, but in a different way. You were fighting to find answers while I was fighting to stay alive long enough to maybe benefit from those answers. She leaned forward, her eyes bright with an energy he hadn't seen before. That's why I want to help you. I've been thinking about this for weeks now. You have all the scientific knowledge, but you've never experienced what it's like to be on the receiving end of medical treatment. I have 8 months of that experience. The idea was starting to make sense to him. You mean like a collaboration? Science meets real-world experience? Exactly. I can tell you things that no textbook can teach you. Like how certain treatments affect your daily life, what side effects really feel like, what questions patients wish their doctors would ask. She stood up and walked over to his desk, looking at the research papers spread across the surface. For example, this paper here talks about cellular regeneration in laboratory mice. But what about the psychological aspect of healing? How does hope affect recovery? How does feeling supported change the way your body responds to treatment? He watched her examining his work with genuine curiosity. This wasn't someone offering to help out of pity or because she felt sorry for him. This was someone who saw a real opportunity to contribute something valuable. I've kept detailed notes, she said, turning back to him. Every day since my diagnosis. How I felt, how treatments affected me, what worked and what didn't. Not just the medical stuff, but everything. What I ate, how I slept, what helped me stay positive. She pulled out her phone and showed him an app. I've been tracking everything. Energy levels, pain levels, mood, appetite. I thought maybe someday it would help me make sense of what I was going through. But now I'm thinking it might help you understand what patients really experience. The possibilities were starting to excite him. This could change everything about how I approach my research. Instead of just looking at cells in a lab, I could understand how treatments actually affect real people. And instead of just being a patient, she said, I could be part of finding solutions. Even if the treatments don't work for me, maybe our collaboration could help someone else. They spent the next hour going through his research, with her asking questions he had never considered, and pointing out aspects of treatment he had never thought about. She told him about the isolation of being sick, about how important it felt to have a sense of purpose, about the way hope could literally change how you felt physically. There's something else, she said as the clock approached midnight. Tomorrow's test results will tell us if my current treatment is working. If it's not, we'll need to discuss other options. More aggressive treatments or, she didn't finish the sentence but he understood, or preparing for the end. Either way, she continued, I want to spend whatever time I have doing something meaningful, something that matters beyond just me. She gathered her coat from the floor and put it back on, but this time she didn't seem to be hiding behind it. I know this is a lot to think about. A stranger showing up at your door with a crazy proposal. It's not crazy, he said, and he meant it. It's the best idea I've heard in 3 years of research. She smiled that real smile again. Then let's change the world, one cell at a time. As she walked toward the door, she turned back one last time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for not making me feel like I was just bothering you with my problems. Thank you for trusting me with something so personal. After she left, he sat in his apartment for a long time, looking at his research with completely new eyes. Tomorrow they would both face uncertain news. But for the first time in months, he felt like he was on the verge of a real breakthrough. The next morning arrived gray and cloudy, matching the nervous energy that filled his apartment. He had barely slept, his mind racing with thoughts about their conversation and what her test results might reveal. At 7 a.m. he heard her door open and close down the hall. She was leaving for her appointment. He tried to focus on his research, but every few minutes he found himself glancing toward the window that faced the courtyard. The morning dragged on endlessly. He made coffee, then forgot to drink it. He read the same paragraph in a research paper 5 times without absorbing any of it. Around noon, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It's me from last night. Tests are done. Waiting for results. Can I come by later? He texted back immediately. Of course. I'll be here. The afternoon was even worse than the morning. He kept checking his phone, wondering how long test results took, wondering what she was going through sitting in some sterile waiting room. He realized he didn't even know her name, yet he was more worried about her than he had been about anyone in a long time. At 4:30, there was a soft knock at his door. When he opened it, he could read the news on her face before she said a word. Her eyes were red from crying, But there was also something else there. Relief, maybe. Or acceptance. The treatment isn't working, she said simply, stepping into his apartment. The tumors haven't shrunk. Some of them have actually grown. He felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. I'm so sorry, she shook her head. Don't be sorry yet. There are other options. More aggressive treatments, experimental therapies. But they come with bigger risks and worse side effects. She sat down on his couch in the same spot as the night before. Today she looked smaller somehow, more fragile, but her voice was steady. The doctor wants me to think about it over the weekend. Decide if I want to try the aggressive treatments or focus on comfort care instead. The words hung heavy in the air. Comfort care. He knew what that meant. What are you thinking? He asked carefully. She was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window toward her apartment. I keep thinking about what we talked about last night. About purpose. About doing something that matters. She turned to look at him. I've spent 8 months being a patient, being someone things happen to. But last night, for the first time since my diagnosis, I felt like I could be someone who makes things happen. She pulled out a thick folder from her bag. I brought my notes. Everything I've documented since this whole thing started. I stayed up all night organizing it, thinking about how it might help your research. He took the folder, surprised by how heavy it was. Inside were dozens of pages of handwritten notes, printed charts, even photographs documenting her journey. This is incredible, he said, flipping through the pages. You've documented everything. Physical symptoms, emotional changes, treatment effects, even how different environments affected how you felt. I was a nurse before all this started, she said. Pediatric intensive care. I'm used to keeping detailed records. I guess old habits die hard. You were a nurse? This explained so much about how she had approached her own illness with such systematic observation. For 12 years, I loved that job more than anything. Taking care of kids who were fighting for their lives, helping their families through the worst times imaginable. It gave me purpose every single day. Her voice grew soft. When I got sick, I had to quit. Couldn't risk being around sick children with my compromised immune system. That was almost as hard as the diagnosis itself. Suddenly, I went from being someone who helped people to someone who needed help. She opened the folder to a specific page. But last night, when you explained your research, I realized something. All that medical knowledge didn't just disappear when I became a patient. And all this experience I'm gaining as a patient doesn't have to be wasted. The page she showed him was covered with detailed observations about her treatment experience, but written with the clinical precision of a medical professional. You see things from both sides, he said, understanding dawning on him. The medical training gives you insight into the science, and the patient experience gives you insight into what it really means. Exactly. And you know what I realized today sitting in that doctor's office? I've learned more about cellular biology and treatment protocols in the last 8 months than most people learn in years of school. Not by choice, but still. She pulled out another section of notes. I've been thinking about your research all night. You're studying cellular regeneration, right? But have you considered the role of psychological factors in cellular repair? He leaned forward, intrigued. What do you mean? Well, I've noticed patterns in my own experience. Days when I felt hopeful and engaged, my energy levels were better. Days when I felt depressed or isolated, everything seemed worse. Even my blood work reflected my emotional state sometimes. This was something he had never considered in his research. You think mental state affects physical healing? I think everything is connected. When I was working as a nurse, I saw kids who had the same diagnosis but completely different outcomes. Some of it was medical, sure, but some of it seemed to be about their support systems, their sense of hope, their feeling of being valued and loved. She showed him charts where she had tracked not just her physical symptoms, but also her emotional state, her social interactions, her sense of purpose on any given day. Look at this week, she said, pointing to recent entries. Monday through Wednesday, I felt terrible, physically and emotionally. Then last night happened, our conversation. Suddenly, I had something to look forward to, something that mattered. Today, even with the bad news, I feel stronger than I have in weeks. He studied her charts, amazed by the detail and insight. This could revolutionize how we think about treatment. Not just what we do to cells, but how we support the whole person whose cells we're trying to heal. That's what I was hoping you'd say. She smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her today. Because I've made my decision about treatment. He waited, sensing this was important. I want to try the aggressive treatment. But not just to buy myself more time. I want to try it as part of our research. I want to document everything. Track every variable we can think of. Physical, emotional, social, spiritual. The idea was both exciting and terrifying. That's a big decision. The aggressive treatments will be harder on you. I know. But here's the thing. If I just focus on comfort care, I might have a few more comfortable months. But if we do this together, maybe my experience can help develop treatments that give other people years. She leaned back on the couch, looking more determined than tired. Besides, you've already given me something I didn't have before. A reason to fight that's bigger than just me. What's that? Partnership. For 8 months, I've been fighting alone, even when I was surrounded by doctors and nurses. But this feels different. This feels like we're in it together, working toward the same goal. Outside, the clouds were starting to break up, letting through patches of sunlight. The gray morning had given way to something brighter. So what happens now? He asked. Now we plan. We design a study that's never been done before. We track every aspect of my experience with treatment, but we do it scientifically. We create protocols, we measure variables, we document everything. She stood up, energy returning to her voice. And who knows? Maybe by the time we're done, we'll have data that helps your research in ways we can't even imagine yet. As she gathered her things to leave, she paused at the door. Thank you for giving me a reason to keep fighting. Not just for more time, but for something that matters. After she left, he sat surrounded by her notes, his mind racing with possibilities. Tomorrow, they would start planning their unprecedented collaboration. Tonight, for the first time in months, he felt like his research might actually change lives. 3 weeks into their collaboration, his apartment had transformed into something between a research lab and a support center. Charts covered the walls, tracking everything from her daily energy levels to her cellular response to treatment. Her kitchen table had become a second workspace where they spent hours analyzing data and planning the next phase of their study. The aggressive treatment had begun 2 weeks earlier, and the side effects were exactly as brutal as the doctors had warned. But something unexpected was happening alongside the physical challenges. Their research was revealing patterns that neither of them had anticipated. Look at this, she said, pointing to a chart they had created together. It was Thursday afternoon, and she had just returned from her latest treatment session. Despite being exhausted, she insisted on updating their data before resting. On days when we worked together on the research, my recovery time from treatment is almost 30% faster than on days when I'm alone. He studied the numbers, amazed by what they were seeing. That's significant. Really significant. It suggests that having a sense of purpose and collaboration might actually improve physical recovery. She smiled weakly from the couch. The treatment was taking its toll, but her eyes still lit up when they discovered something new in their data. My nurse training always told me that patients with strong support systems heal better, but I never imagined the effect could be this measurable. Over the past 3 weeks, they had developed a routine that worked around her treatment schedule. Mornings were for data collection and analysis when her energy was highest. Afternoons were for rest, but often she would call him with observations about how she was feeling, or ideas about their research. Evenings were for planning and discussing their findings. I've been thinking about something, she said, pulling out her notebook. Even on her worst days, she never stopped documenting her experience. We're measuring my physical response to treatment, but what about measuring the quality of the research environment itself? What do you mean? Well, think about it. Traditional medical research happens in clinical settings. Sterile environments, formal protocols, patients who are essentially strangers to the researchers. But we're doing something completely different. She gestured around his apartment, which had become their informal laboratory. We're working in a comfortable space. We've built trust and friendship. We know each other's stories. What if the environment itself is affecting the results? This was the kind of insight that constantly amazed him about working with her. She saw angles he never would have considered. You're saying the relationship itself might be a factor in healing? I'm saying maybe healing isn't just about what happens in the doctor's office. Maybe it's about feeling valued, feeling heard, feeling like your experience matters to someone. She showed him her latest notes. Yesterday was one of my worst treatment days. I was sick, exhausted, felt terrible. But then you called to check on me, and we talked about that breakthrough we had with the cellular regeneration timing. By evening, I felt better than I had any right to feel. He had noticed the same pattern. Days when they worked together seemed to energize both of them. even when she was dealing with difficult side effects. "We should document this too," he said. "Not just your medical response, but the social and emotional factors of our collaboration." Already on it. She handed him another section of her notes. "I've been tracking interaction quality, sense of purpose, feeling of contribution, social support levels. All of it." Their research was becoming something entirely new. Instead of just studying cellular regeneration in isolation, they were discovering how human connection might influence healing at the most basic biological level. "You know what's really interesting?" she said, settling back on the couch with a cup of tea. "Before I got sick, I was always the one helping other people. As a nurse, my job was to care for others, to be strong for families going through crisis. That must have been fulfilling. It was. But it was also one-directional. I gave care, families received it. This is different. This feels like actual partnership." She was right. Over the past few weeks, he had realized that while she was contributing invaluable insights to his research, he was also providing something she needed. Purpose, intellectual stimulation, a sense that her experience was valuable beyond just her own. "Survival. I've learned more about real healing in 3 weeks with you than in 3 years of academic research," he admitted. "And I've learned that being sick doesn't mean you stop being useful. It just means you're useful in different ways." Their collaboration had attracted attention from his professors at the university. When he shared some of their preliminary findings, the response was immediate interest. Several faculty members wanted to meet with them to discuss formalizing their research approach. "They want to turn this into an official study," he told her after a meeting with his advisor. "Bring in other patients, create protocols, maybe even get funding." Her reaction surprised him. Instead of excitement, she looked thoughtful, almost concerned. "What's wrong?" he asked. "I'm not sure this can be replicated," she said slowly. "What we have works because it's genuine. We weren't trying to create a research partnership. We became friends first, and the research grew out of that friendship." She was right again. The power of their collaboration came from the authentic relationship they had built, not from following a research protocol. "Maybe that's the real discovery," she continued. "Maybe healing happens best when it grows out of genuine human connection, not when it's imposed from outside." They spent that evening discussing the implications of this insight. How do you study something that depends on authenticity? How do you scale something that works because it's personal? "I think we need to be very careful," she said. "We can share what we've learned, but we can't try to manufacture what we have. That would destroy the very thing that makes it work." As the weeks progressed, her physical condition remained stable, not improving dramatically but not getting worse either. The aggressive treatment was holding the cancer in check, and their data suggested that her positive mental state and sense of purpose might be contributing to her stability. "My doctor is amazed," she told him after her latest appointment. "He says patients with my diagnosis and treatment history don't usually maintain this level of energy and optimism." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I had something important to work on, something that made me want to get up every morning." Their research had become more than just a study. It had become a lifeline for both of them. For her, it provided purpose and hope during the darkest period of her life. For him, it had transformed his understanding of what healing really meant. "Whatever happens with my treatment," she said one evening as they reviewed their latest findings, "I want you to know that these weeks have been the most meaningful of my life. Not despite being sick, but because being sick led me to this work with you." "For me too," he said. "You've changed everything about how I think about research, about healing, about what really matters." Outside, winter was giving way to spring. The days were getting longer, and through the window that connected their 2 apartments, he could see the first signs of new growth in the courtyard garden. Their collaboration had taught them both that healing wasn't just about fixing what was broken. Sometimes it was about finding new ways to grow, even in the most difficult circumstances. 6 months after that first late-night conversation, their small apartment research project had grown into something neither of them could have imagined. Word of their unique collaboration had spread through the medical community, and researchers from 3 different universities were asking to review their findings. But the most important development was happening in the lab results. Her latest scans showed something that had stunned her medical team. The aggressive tumors that had been growing just months earlier were not only stable but actually shrinking. Her energy levels were the highest they had been since her diagnosis. And her doctors were using words like remarkable and unprecedented. I don't want to say it's a miracle. Her oncologist had told them both during her last appointment. But whatever you two are doing, keep doing it. Her response to treatment has exceeded every expectation we had. She sat in his apartment that afternoon, holding the scan results in her hands. After months of bad news and declining numbers, seeing improvement felt surreal. Do you think it's really our research that's making the difference? She asked, though deep down they both suspected it was more than just coincidence. I think it's everything, he replied, looking at the walls covered with their charts and findings. The research gave you purpose, the collaboration gave you connection, and the sense of contributing something meaningful gave you hope. Maybe those things are just as important as the medical treatment. Their data supported this theory. Over 6 months, they had documented not just her medical response, but also the psychological and social factors that surrounded her healing. The patterns were clear and consistent. Days filled with research collaboration, correlated with better physical symptoms. Weeks when they made breakthrough discoveries coincided with improved blood work. Times when she felt most valued as a research partner matched with her strongest recovery periods. We need to write this up properly, she said, energy returning to her voice. Not just for the medical journals, but for other patients. People need to know that healing might be about more than just following doctor's orders. They had been working toward this moment for weeks. Their informal study was ready to be shared with the world, but both of them felt nervous about it. What they had discovered challenged traditional approaches to medical treatment in ways that might not be well received by everyone. What if they don't believe it? He asked. What if they think our results are just coincidence or wishful thinking? Then we'll prove it again, she said with determination. We'll find other patients who want to be true partners in their treatment, not just passive recipients. We'll show that this approach can work for more than just me. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of writing, editing, and preparing their research for publication. She brought her nursing expertise to bear on making their findings accessible to both medical professionals and patients. He contributed his scientific training to ensure their methodology would stand up to academic scrutiny. What emerged was groundbreaking. Their paper titled Partnership-Based Healing, The Role of Authentic Collaboration in Treatment. Outcomes documented not just her medical recovery, but the entire process of how their relationship had influenced her healing. The response from the medical community was immediate and intense. Some researchers were skeptical, questioning whether their results could be replicated or if they were just documenting a lucky coincidence. Others were fascinated, seeing potential for revolutionizing how patients and medical professionals work together. But the response that mattered most came from patients themselves. Within weeks of their paper being published online, they were receiving emails from people all over the world who wanted to try a similar approach to their own treatment. Listen to this, she said one morning, reading from her laptop. This is from a woman in California who has the same diagnosis I had 6 months ago. She says she's been looking for a researcher to partner with, someone studying her specific type of cancer. She wants to document her experience the way I did. More emails followed. Patients wanting to contribute to research about their conditions. Researchers looking for authentic patient partners. Medical professionals interested in incorporating collaboration into their treatment protocols. We started something, he said, amazed by the response they were seeing. We proved something, she corrected. We proved that patients aren't just people who need to be fixed. We're people who can contribute to our own healing and to helping others heal. Their success led to an invitation that neither of them had expected. The National Medical Research Conference wanted them to present their findings to an audience of doctors, researchers, and policymakers from around the country. Standing on that stage 6 months later, looking out at hundreds of medical professionals, she felt a long way from the frightened woman who had knocked on his door that first night. When I was diagnosed with cancer, she began, I thought my life as someone who helped others was over. I thought I was becoming just a patient, just someone things happened to instead of someone who made things happen. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. But what I learned through this collaboration is that illness doesn't have to mean the end of purpose. Sometimes it can mean the beginning of a different kind of contribution. She gestured to the data displayed behind her, months of charts and findings that told the story of her recovery. These numbers don't just represent my personal healing. They represent a new way of thinking about what healing means. It's not just about what doctors do to patients. It's about what happens when patients become true partners in both their own treatment and in advancing medical knowledge. The standing ovation lasted several minutes. Afterward, they were surrounded by researchers and doctors wanting to learn more, wanting to try similar approaches with their own patients, but the moment that meant the most to both of them came later that evening. A young doctor approached them during the reception, tears in her eyes. "My mother was just diagnosed with the same cancer you had," she told them.
6 months ago, I would have just focused on finding her the best medical team.
"But after hearing your presentation, I'm going to help her find a way to be an active partner in her treatment. Thank you for showing us that patients can be researchers too." 6 months after that conference, their approach had been adopted by medical centers in 12 states. The partnership protocol they had developed was being used to pair patients with researchers in ways that benefited both treatment outcomes and scientific advancement. Her own health continued to improve. The scans that had once shown aggressive tumors now showed only tiny, stable spots that her doctors described as negligible. She was back to working part-time as a nursing consultant, specializing in helping hospitals develop patient partnership programs. He had completed his doctoral degree and was now leading a research team focused entirely on studying the relationship between patient empowerment and healing outcomes. Their work together had become the foundation for his career and had changed the trajectory of medical research in their field. But more than professional success, they had discovered something profound about human resilience and connection. They had proven that even in the darkest circumstances, people could find ways to help each other that went beyond traditional roles and expectations. "Do you ever think about that first night?" she asked him one evening as they reviewed applications from patients wanting to join their expanded research program. "Every day," he replied. "You knocked on my door looking for someone to help you face the truth about your situation. But you ended up teaching me truths about healing that I never could have discovered in any laboratory." Their story had become bigger than just her recovery or his research. It had become proof that healing happens not just through medicine, but through purpose, connection, and the courage to look directly at difficult truths without turning away. And every night, the light in his apartment still stayed on late, not just for his own work now, but as a beacon for anyone who might need to know that somewhere, someone was fighting for answers that could help them too.